The U.S. naval era of Guam from 1899 to 1941 and 1944 to 1950 was a time in Guam history when the American Navy directly governed Guam. Guam's naval era tends to either be glossed over in Chamorro history or viewed as an idyllic and prosperous period, particularly before the outbreak of World War II. The idyllic narrative usually goes like this. The Americans provided much economic and social development, especially in sanitation and education, for the Chamorros of Guam, who were neglected under the previous Spanish administration. However, the historical record paints a much different picture, which includes cultural suppression, denial of basic civil and political rights, and forced assimilation for the Chamorro people. Guåhan, and in this video we will examine the tyranny of Guam's American naval government. The naval government of Guam is best described as an authoritarian military dictatorship. Rather than a civilian administration, it was a military administration, with the Navy governing Guam as a naval station. Supreme power of the executive, legislative, and judicial branches of government were in the hands of a single naval officer, referred to as the naval governor. The naval governor was not democratically elected by the people of Guam, but rather appointed for an approximate 18 to 24-month term by the Secretary of Navy, who, along with the President of the United States, were the only people who the governor had to answer to. Under the naval government, Chamorros were denied political and civil rights. Chamorros were denied representation in the naval government despite paying taxes. In 1917, Chamorros were finally given some representation in the naval government through the Guam Congress. However, it served only as an advisory role and had no real power. For example, the first Guam Congress requested the governor to grant the people of Guam basic civil and political rights, but predictably, its requests were denied. In sum, the American naval government was a military dictatorship with no systems of checks and balances, no independent oversight, and supreme power was in the hands of an appointed naval officer. The main agenda of the naval government was the so-called benevolent assimilation of the people of Guam through elevating their standard of living through education, sanitation, and westernization. As the first naval governor of Guam, Leary stated, "Within the absolute domain of naval authority, which necessarily is and must remain supreme in the ceded territory until the legislation of the U.S. shall otherwise provide, the mission of the United States is one of benevolent assimilation, substituting the bowed sway of justice and right for arbitrary rule. In fulfillment of this high mission, there must be sedulously maintained the strong arm of authority to repress disturbance and to overcome all obstacles to the bestowal of the blessing of good government upon the people of the island of Guam under the green flag of the United States." This was not out of genuine humanitarian concern for the well-being of the Chamorros, but for American self-interest, to make the Chamorros useful to the Americans. As Naval Governor Dyer explained, "It is therefore incumbent on us for our self-protection and efficiency to give the natives such care as they are unable to get for themselves, to see that they are kept healthy and free from contagion, are afforded practical instruction in their sole pursuits, agriculture, and to educate some of them to occupy such positions as clerks, mechanics, and intelligent laborers in the naval station. These people must be taught at once to help themselves in ways to make themselves useful to us. But their preliminary steps must be guided by us." To accomplish this goal, naval governors issued many autocratic orders aimed at suppressing Chamorro cultural practices, assimilating the Chamorros, controlling the economy, and the people of Guam. Cultural suppression of Chamorro culture and language was necessary as the Navy viewed them as backwards and detrimental for the advancement of the Chamorros. The first naval governor issued a flurry of orders banning village-wide public fiestas and Catholic processions, kicking out the Spanish priests, requiring registration of land, restricting the exports of food, eliminating popular elections for municipal leaders, to mention a few. All of these orders benefited the Navy. For example, by banning public fiestas, the Navy wanted to ensure that Chamorros will continue to work the fields rather than spending their time setting up for these fiestas, so that there will be enough food to feed the American garrison. Throughout the first naval period, several aspects of everyday Chamorro life were regulated. U.S. patrolmen would go into villages to ensure that the naval ordinances were followed, such as not allowing weeds to grow to a certain height. Some governors issued highly repressive cultural orders, such as banning the Chamorro language in education and making English the only official language. Chamorro English dictionaries were burned to encourage only English language policies. Children in the schools were taught in only English by mostly white Americans. Some naval governors issued nonsensical orders such as the ban of public dancing and whistling. Even what is considered as the crowning achievement of the U.S. naval government, the improvement of sanitation among Chamorros, which is often used to legitimize the naval government, was not at all what it seemed to be, as it required the intrusion and control of Chamorro bodies beyond a reasonable level. The Navy wanted to improve the health of Chamorros so that their own American personnel will have a healthy environment to live and work on the island. The health programs also function as propaganda. By showing the world about how they are improving the health of Chamorros, they can justify their authoritarian rule and colonialism. Contrary to the narratives that all the Chamorros were grateful and desired American rule, the authoritarian nature of the American naval government caused distress to some Chamorros. This overtly manifested itself in a 1901 petition to the U.S. Congress signed by 32 prominent Chamorros. The petition pointed out the authoritarian nature of the naval administration and that the Chamorros had more rights under the previous Spanish administration compared to America. The petitioners asked Congress to grant Guam self-governance. This petition was ignored, along with several other petitions requesting greater political and civil rights. As the former director of the Office of Indian Affairs in the Department of the Interior, John Collier, said in 1947, "The naval administration, as a matter of policy, is totalitarian. Its control of the economic life of the islanders is a boundless control. Anti-democratic administration and economic totalitarianism are not an environment in which Guam's self-rule can grow. The result is not merely a theoretical denial of all civil rights, it is a complete practical denial of them. It is also inefficiency of fantastic dimensions with accompanying financial extravagance, as is only now fully known." You may be thinking, how is the U.S. naval government allowed to govern Guam like this when authoritarianism goes against the democratic principles of the U.S. Constitution, you may ask. The answer is because the U.S. Constitution allows for Congress to deny provisions of the U.S. Constitution to unincorporated territories. In a series of Supreme Court cases known as the Insular Cases, it established that the full provisions of the U.S. Constitution need not apply to unincorporated territories. Thus, since Guam is an unincorporated territory of the United States, Congress was able to deny the people of Guam U.S. citizenship along with basic civil and political rights. It would not be until 1950 through Guam's Organic Act that U.S. citizenship, limited self-government, and a guarantee of basic civil and political rights would be granted to the people of Guam. Of course, not everything was entirely bad under the naval administration. Despite the racist and intrusive U.S. health policies on Guam, a favorable side effect of the policies was the dramatic decline in deaths due to infectious diseases such as tuberculosis and intestinal parasites among Chamorros. Furthermore, not every naval governor used their power to abuse the people of Guam. There were some good naval governors who used their power for the benefit of the people of Guam, most notably Naval Governor Willis W. Bradley. Recognizing the abuses that naval governors cause and can cause to the Chamorros, Bradley created a Guam Bill of Rights and petitioned Congress for U.S. citizenship for the people of Guam. However, despite the good that came under the naval administration, we should not forget the fact that the naval government was an inherently unequal, anti-democratic, authoritarian military administration. The interests of the United States came before everything else, and the military government used their supreme power to enforce those interests at the expense of the people of Guam. If you liked and enjoyed the video, consider supporting me on Patreon so I can continue to produce more Pacific Studies content. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, turn on all notifications, follow me on social media at Puti'on Speaks. And a special Seduce Masi to Patreon supporters Puti'on, Pim Limtiaco, and Dylan Sablan. Seduce Masi for watching, Guåhan and Puti'on has spoken. Esta.